Hello, everybody. Tom of 6 here, the very lowest of men, back once again with some new content for you. I am launching a little series called Counterplay Plus. This is going to be going out for our members first and then for wider release. And the goal with this content is to help you deal with problem units in the game and get you to sort of understanding the process of looking at and solving particular challenges posed by particular new units and combos that the game throws at us, and how you as a player can adapt to deal with them. And I'm starting with one of the boogeymen of our current meta as it's starting to emerge, Warp Talons. Got a nice little Night Lord Warp Talon there. Don't worry, you won't see them in Night Lords. Night Lord's still pretty rubbish. But this is a unit I've seen a lot of chatter about online. And a lot of that chatter has basically been along the lines of, well, let's just wait till they get adjusted or taken out of the game. And I understand that line of thinking, but it's not a line of thinking I particularly subscribe to. I think we have to be ready to look at and solve problems. That's what we're going to be doing today. As ever, thanks so much for supporting 6 You can hit like and subscribe. You can leave a comment. Please do those things. That helps us with the algorithmic chaos gods to get where we need to go. And obviously, if you're interested in more content, you can sign up to become a YouTube member and support us that way as well. Right, let's get into this. So, what is the problem? Why are Warp Talons an issue all of a sudden? So at face value, they're not too bad. They are marine bodies with a 5-up invuln, 3-up save, 12-inch move. So quick skirmish infantry. They have 4 attacks each at AP 2, damage 1. Twin linked, so re-rolling their wounds, and obviously they have access to pacts, so they can be getting sustained or lethal on 6s or in 5s if they're in pact bound. And the crucial thing with Warp Talons is their new data sheet ability, and this ability allows them to return to reserves after fighting if they are no longer in engagement range. So this is obviously a phenomenally powerful tool. It means the Warp Talons can launch out, attack something, kill it, then go back up into the sky. It also combos very well with a move stratagem in the Renegade Raiders detachment, which means that even if they haven't killed a unit, they can make a move back out of combat and then go up into reserves afterwards. Obviously, the nasty combination play here is that the Chaos Space Marines player can be killing something with a brick of Warp Talons, going up in the sky, and then in your subsequent turn, using rapid ingress to bring that brick back, ready to launch a counterattack and attack you somewhere else. So this is undeniably one of the most potent combinations in sort of a melee unit that we've seen. It gives it a really non-interactive, non-trading way of dealing with its opponent and creates a particular challenge that the opponent needs to solve that is definitely obnoxious, definitely annoying, and definitely newsworthy, which is why we're hearing so much chatter about them. That said, there's stuff you can do here, so let's get into it. When I'm trying to solve a problem in the game, when I'm trying to adapt to a change in the meta, there are a number of different questions I like to ask. Understanding an opponent's army is how you beat it. Understanding your own is great, but unless you move beyond that to dealing with and synthesizing solutions to your opponents, you are going to struggle to hit those high results. So the things I like to ask is, what does my opponent want to happen? What is the unit and the army trying to do here? What is the goal? And then looking at that, what are the points of failure and weaknesses that it has? What can go wrong? What will mean it doesn't do what it wants to do? And what sorts of questions can I ask in return that are going to make doing what they want to do harder? Finally, we can think about how you exploit that. What are the optimum ways of punishing the weaknesses that the plan has or the points of failure that it has? And as a reminder, you always have the alternative option, the secret option that a lot of players like to take, which is you can cry about it, refuse to play it, and pray for nerfs as well. So if you'd like to do that, that's absolutely valid, and it remains an option for you at all times. So, what does my opponent want? Well, with Warp Talons are in general intended to trade up a problem that CSM often have, which is trading, especially into cheap, chaffy armies. CSM are very dangerous, very punchy, but they're also very elite. So when they trade units in combat, they often trade down, right? They'll often kill a small chaffy unit and then be picked up in exchange. And it's quite common that the CSM unit is more valuable in a lot of different matchups. So Warp Talons give the CSM player a way of non-trading, right? They're going to push out, they're going to kill a thing, they're going to disappear, they're going to come back. So if they're recycled endlessly, Warp Talons can kill well over their points cost, which helps to make up that points deficit and gives the CSM player a way out of getting stuck in a trading war with a cheaper, more sort of chaffy army. Obviously, being able to constantly trigger and recycle rapid ingress opportunities is also very powerful. Rapid ingress on a really fast, dangerous brick is a massive problem for the opponent, gives the CSM player the means to hit them in their soft parts. So triggering rapid ingress via Warp Talons is now going to be a fairly fundamental part of CSM game plans in a lot of different matches. And they're also looking for targets that Warp Talons can consistently kill. They are infantry skirmish unit. They are dangerous. They have a lot of volume and they have a lot of AP, especially when coupled with Renegade Raiders and fighting on objectives. But they also need to pick their targets carefully. And there are, in the kinds of targets that they select, some indicators of what their points of failure and their limitations are as well. So let's think about what some of the points of failures and weaknesses are for Warp Talons. The first thing is that if Warp Talons fail a charge, they are in trouble. The rule requires them to have been eligible to fight in that fight phase, which means they have to have made combat. They have to have successfully made a charge or already been in combat in order to actually use their going back up in the sky. So if they don't make it to the opponent, they are sat in the open and they are much more vulnerable. At the end of the day, Warp Talons are 2 wound, 3 up save, 5 off invuln bodies. They are not particularly durable. They do die when attacked by serious damage of any kind, be that shooting or combat, which again gives us ways into dealing with them here as well. Their output is AP 2, Strength 5, Damage 1. The twin link means this is a lot more effective, and the pact as well means it's a lot more effective. And obviously, if you are on an objective in Renegade Raiders, these can be AP 3, at which point they become extremely dangerous. But it is a lot of Damage 1. It definitely has weaknesses. It definitely has certain kinds of things it doesn't want to fight, and it definitely has situations in which it becomes significantly less powerful. So we need to think about those as well. Finally, Warp Talons have 12-inch move. They can advance and charge with a stratagem in a couple of the detachments if they combo well with Pact Bound and with Renegade Raiders, but they are ultimately a unit, the movement of which you can plot, right? That is roughly 15 to 16 inches plus charge around the board. And so that's going to shape the kind of places they can attack. It's going to shape the places that they can drop into. And measuring and understanding the threat ranges of Warp Talons is going to be extremely important for dealing with them, because that gives us our ways into determining what it is they can fight and where on the board they can go. They are quick, but there are definitely quicker things out there. And so these are your ways in. And also that does also suggest that, between needing to pop advance and charge strats, between needing to rapid ingress, a CSM player is spending a lot of resources, command points wise, on making sure Warp Talons continue to do their thing across a game. So how do we exploit their limitations? Well, the first thing is to create as much charge risk as you possibly can. There's obviously a whole set of different ways of doing this. Some of the biggest ones are reactive moves, right? Skirmishing units that can then reactive move 6 inches away or D6 inches away, that are placed a decent way outside the Warp Talons kind of optimal charge and threat ranges, give them a real problem. That creates massive risk. They might well be caught out, unable to complete their charge and unable to go back up into the sky. Creating parts of the board in which there are very dubious charges that are risky definitely helps you to manage where Warp Talons can go. Other things you can do is create overwatch lanes, which means that if they are going to make a safe charge, they need to come into a part of the board where they're at very real risk of being overwatched with something else. In general, Warp Talon bricks, once they start suffering casualties, become a lot less effective. So you want to create as many situations as you can in which they will take incidental casualties. So the more risk you can create for the Warp Talons as they try and get around the board, the better. Warp Talons are also very vulnerable to fights first and heroic interventions. If they end up picking a fight with more units than they can handle, or a unit that's going to hit them first, they become significantly less effective. So options like Lilith Hesperax or the Sanguinor, or a sort of hidden, very tough unit lurking just behind a unit they might want to fight, ready to make a heroic intervention into them, all create situations in which Warp Talons are very vulnerable to getting picked up en masse, and then your opponent is losing a 200-point unit at times, or a good chunk of it. And that makes it radically less effective. So fight phase control of any kind is extremely potent and powerful into Warp Talons. Indirect fire is less common than it was, but it's really good against Warp Talons. They are ultimately just marine bodies. They give up blast keyword when they're running around in a 10-man brick. And so indirect platforms will do enormous damage to Warp Talons, and there's not a ton the CSM player can do about it. So very useful to pack a little bit of indirect into your list if you can. If you're one of the armies with access to decent indirect, that makes a massive difference in dealing with Warp Talons. Fast countercharge units are also good. Things that can push out and tackle Warp Talons in the kinds of places they like to stage on the board mean that they too cannot push up as far as they would like, which increases the risk of the Warp Talons being too far out to attempt all the charges that they want. So having something that itself can run out a very decent distance and hit Warp Talons where they would like to be staging on the board is extremely effective. Things like Death Company or a Drukhari Raider pushing out and Incubi getting out create lanes in which the Warp Talons themselves have to stay a very respectful distance away, or they find themselves in trouble. Fight on Death is extremely potent into Warp Talons. If you have good, dangerous Fight on Death units, the trading game that Warp Talons are trying to avoid happens anyway, because they'll go in, kill a unit, lose an enormous amount of their efficiency and effect being killed back by Fight on Death. Things like the full Fight on Death available to Orcs or Blood Angels is really useful here, but even a 4-up Fight on Death on a good unit can cause them to think twice. So being able to proc and access Fight on Death in particular places is extremely valuable. So making sure you save CP for that to create problems for your opponent is really, really important. Finally, although they are strength 5 with Twin Linked, Warp Talons are most likely to struggle when fighting against high toughness targets with access to either -1 to hit or -1 to wound and Armor of Contempt. So anything reducing their AP down and avoiding letting them trigger extra AP where possible. Anything that is going to put them on 5s to rerolling or 6s rerolling to wound and maybe push them away from sustained hits with the pack towards lethals because they're worried about the toughness, and anything that's going to make them less accurate is extremely effective at nullifying their output. So once their output starts dropping off, and particularly into hard targets, I'm thinking something like Squighog Boys here, right, with T7 -1 to wound with a feel no pain. Suddenly that becomes really, really obnoxious for a Warp Talon unit to deal with. So presenting very armored, very brutal targets that Warp Talons themselves don't want to deal with in parts of the board that only they're really in a position to do anything about is a really nice way of nullifying their threat. Finally, I think you want to use good screening, and you do want to be pushing out and making sure you control space in the board once they've recycled once, right? You want to make sure they don't have an easy rapid ingress that's going to let them drop in behind you or drop in able to push out over your lines into good parts of the board. So once the Warp Talon squad's up in the sky, you want to be pushing out and controlling the space. Conversely, you don't want to be doing that turn 1. Because turn 1, all you're going to do in this situation, especially if you go second, is give Warp Talons a very easy yo-yo off one of your cheap advanced units to then start the ingress. So if you can avoid giving Warp Talons an easy kill turn 1, that's extremely effective. CSN themselves don't really have access to forward deploy or don't commonly bring it outside of Nurglings. And whilst Nurglings are annoying, they're not dangerous, and they're also not primary play units. So Nurglings out in the midboard is fine. You can mitigate and deal with that, and there isn't typically many by way of Nurglings to deal with. What you don't want to do is be giving up your lighter trading units early for essentially no gain. So you want to create a situation where the CSM player have to push out a little bit to come to you and then launch your counter attack. And then once Warp Talons have killed, and if you haven't been able to stop them recycling, then you want to be spreading out as much as you can, filling up the space and controlling where they drop so that they drop back further and are less able to expose weaker points in your lines and get back into the game quickly. If you create a situation where the CSM player really struggles to get a useful recycle out of the Warp Talons for a turn, that massively mitigates their efficiency, as does all of the tricks suggested above. Everything above is going to help you whittle Warp Talons down regardless of whether they're managing to go back up in the sky or not. And if you can get that brick down to a smaller number of bodies, the efficiency and effectiveness of it drops off rapidly, and that gives you a much greater chance of managing it in the game. Hopefully that gives you some idea. It is an extremely obnoxious unit with a lot of power, but there's a lot of things that can ruin its day. So identifying those, building those into your game plan, and exploiting its weaknesses as much as you can is going to give you every chance of making it a very bad day for the Talons. Thank you so much for your continued support of 6++. We really appreciate it. Please do hit like, subscribe, leave us a comment. If you had games against or with Warp Talons, what sorts of things are working for you? What sorts of things have you had going wrong? Are they as broken as people are saying they are? What do you think? Is this a unit that needs adjusting, or is there enough counterplay to it that it sits in a reasonable place in the current game? You can, of course, become a 6++ member via YouTube and support us on that way. If you're interested in getting mentoring, support, and coaching at 6++, you can also get in touch with myself or Chris. We'd be very very happy to work with you. And finally, we have a thriving free Discord that you can get involved in. There'll be links on the page and in the description. And there's massive conversations going on in those chats for all the different factions, all sorts of hobby talk, all sorts of sort of TTS games and other things being arranged. And we'd love to have you there. So please do come and get involved. That's it for this time. I'll see you again next time. I think the next unit I'm going to do a counterplay on will be Meganobs. So I shall see you for that one. Lowest of Men out. Bye-bye.